Well, ladies and gentlemen, why did we help Russia? This is a question that I've had much in my life. I've wondered, why did our grandfathers, our great-grandfathers perhaps, why did they help Soviet Russia? Why didn't we just let Hitler take Moscow, and then we could attack Hitler, and he would be spread so far and so weak and still be in a civil war in Russia? Maybe we should have helped him a little bit, but not as much as we did. Maybe something like that. Maybe we helped him way too much, right? Why? Why did we help Russia? Because then we fought them in the Cold War for the next 40 years. All the stuff we gave them, all the knowledge we gave them, all the steel plants and ball bearing plants and trucks and factories and trains and locomotives and ships and planes, all this stuff we gave them during World War II. Why? Why did we do that? So, here's this lady named Diane West. She wrote a book called The Red Thread.
Nothing. It was as if it hadn't happened. Imagine, you have to scramble history some, but imagine if after Hitler killed 6 million of his own people, 6 million Jews, a nation decided after that to normalize relations. We would, be tearing our hair out.
So she's talking about the fact that Stalin killed all these people and we normalized relations with them in the 30s. Who did? FDR, one of the worst presidents ever. It was Reagan's favorite president. But everybody had to love FDR because he won the war. But one of the things that he did was he let a whole bunch of Reds in. And the 1930s was the Red decade in America. Communists were popular everywhere, including in our government. And FDR put them at the highest levels in the White House. Out and out communists who liked Soviet Russia and agreed with it and stuff. The Cold War was in the future at this point. Communism was popular. We had a 95% tax rate on the upper income brackets in the United States. The Great Depression happened for a reason. It happened because of government control. All right? So I didn't previously know that there were communists put in place by FDR at the highest levels of our government. So when we start deciding what should we do war-wise, who should we give money to, who should we support, one thing we should definitely do is give Soviet Russia tons and tons of stuff. Steel plants, ball bearing plants, locomotive plants, automotive plants. Not just the locomotives and the automobiles, but the plants to build them we shipped to them. Not just steel, ship them a bunch of steel. No. Plants to make steel. The technology to make steel, we sent them. Why? Why?
But this was a relationship that was always based on this kind of self-delusion, lies, even the agreement itself. It's a very brief exchange of notes. It's kind of surprising when you go back to it. One of the pages, really the only real page of stipulations, is a series of promises that the Soviet Union had to sign that basically said, we promise we won't support agents in your country to try to overthrow your constitution. This was already going on. It only ramped up after normalization. And
so they promised not to interfere with our constitutional government. That was their promise, and they certainly aren't going to honor that, are they? They're communists.
The government, the U.S. government, all the institutions at this point had to pretend that they were keeping their bargain. This was a big sea change for the United States. It was an absolute, you can see the rise of a double standard in U.S. policies, really double standards everywhere. But
now this doublethink and political correctness and two-sidedness and communists in the top echelons of our government, what did that lead to? Did we pay a price for that? Yeah, it was called the Cold War. We outfitted a foreign government that was utterly hostile to our nation. And not only that, we allowed that government to infiltrate our nation. No, I'm not talking about China, I'm talking about Soviet Russia.
But in terms of the nuts and bolts of it, we would end up in this New Deal administration of Roosevelt's in the 1930s, literally hundreds of Americans working for the Kremlin. That means not one Aldrich Ames, not 5 Cambridge spies led by Kim Philby, but hundreds.
Hundreds of Americans working for the Kremlin. Now, we built stuff for them in the 1930s. I thought that they paid us gold and then our corporations went and built the stuff over there. And I always wondered a little bit why the government would allow our corporations to go build stuff like that in a foreign country that was so violent and hostile. But now I know. Now I know why. Because FDR was a communist and he allowed or promoted or created infiltration of the government by communists at the highest levels.
And they were in place by the 1940s when we entered the war. They were doing things right here in Washington, some at an extremely...
So once we entered the war, the system was already in place. It had already been in place for a long time, for years. Not decades, but for years.
Highest levels possible. And when I was, again, looking at this, trying to bring, obviously bringing fresh eyes to it because I didn't know half of it or even more, it struck me that there comes a point with infiltration when it's so dense and so strategic that you have to start thinking of it as an occupation. It kind of helps when you look at it that way. And I think when you look back...
Our government was virtually occupied by communists. Virtually. Not quite. Didn't get there. We then got McCarthyism and backed out of it. But what about today? What is the deep state? Now, Peter Thiel says that the CCP has infiltrated Google and Facebook and Twitter. And if they had, then Google, Facebook, and Twitter would be acting a lot like they do. Wouldn't they? I mean, maybe this is not just insane leftists being insane leftists.
Back and you think of Washington as having been de facto Soviet occupied in this period, things start making a little more sense. This would include, I mentioned Lachlan Curry at the White House. You had a man named Duncan Lee advising the Wild Bill Donovan of the OSS, many others at the OSS, Franz Neumann on the German desk, for example, Alger Hiss very famously at the State Department. And of course, there was also FDR's top advisor, Harry Hopkins, who remains a very controversial figure. But I do a lot with Harry Hopkins in terms of pulling a dossier together. I did study it very deeply, and for with various evidence in mind, I think he was a conscious agent. But he certainly acted as if he were, and effectively promoted the Soviet line to such a point that we had essentially a Soviet occupation even inside the White House because he lived there. He lived with Roosevelt for 3.5 years, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, in on everything, particularly in this intense war period.
Now, what do you think happened during the Obama administration? I mean, we know what happened during the Clinton administration, right? They sold everything to the commies. Everything. Clintons gave them nuclear secrets and everything. They sold the Russians our uranium processing and our everything, right? Scandalous. So what happened under Obama? So what is Trump fighting? And what's Trump going to be able to do? Is he going to scratch the beast? So freedom of speech is what we have in America. Europe's going to go through the ringer. We should probably... It's probably a good idea for us to have another McCarthyism, another age of McCarthyism. I think that McCarthyism will be vindicated publicly, and over the long term, I think McCarthyism will be fully vindicated. I think that Diane West and her book, her new book, The Red Thread, let me just pull it up here. I think it's going to be a big, very important new genre. What do all these things have in common? All right, there's the book, The Red Thread. Search for ideological drivers inside the anti-Trump conspiracy. But it's certainly, her body of work certainly is deeper than just don't think of it as just the Trump administration. So, it's looking pretty rough. Looking pretty rough. It looks like the people who would want American factories to all close down and for us to buy stuff from China on credit cards and not even own the homes we live in. The people who want that to happen might be Chinese government affiliated. Oh, okay, all the people at the top of Google now, and all the people at the top of Facebook and Twitter now, they used to be an old white boys club, right? Top of Google 10 years ago, 15 years ago was an old white boys club, wasn't it? That's all gone. Now they're all immigrants from India or some other place. So this is very bizarre. You wonder, where's the Committee on Un-American Activities? Do we not have that anymore? Maybe we need one. Holy moly. Infiltration by communists. Not only of our government through Obama, but media, obviously. Social media. Wow. What are we going to do, ladies and gentlemen? This is getting pretty rough. I hope this video is viewable.
So now, we still somehow have this disconnect between what we now know, that we were penetrated, we know these agents were there, we've had this archival confirmation of much of this, and yet we still think, we look back at the Red Scare and we snicker. Or we look back, oh, you saw commies under every bed, that kind of thing. I mean, that's what automatically comes into everyone's head after this period, really decades of this kind of conditioning to look the other way, not to probe, red bait, or stop thinking about it. I mean, it's really kind of an amazing information operation that we have all sort of lived through. But when you go back and you start reading the memoirs of people who are experiencing...
Now see, we won the Cold War in the sense of not letting the Soviets come over here with guns and tanks. But other than that, it looks like we've capitulated. We gave them our media, we gave them our educational institutions. Look at the colleges today, the colleges and universities. Look at them today. I mean, I knew they were bad 15 years ago when I left them, and I said, this is not going to go. This is a bunch of garbage. But man, today they are just, everybody can see it today. 15 years ago when I said the colleges are full of Marxists, I can't learn anything there. It's insane. People looked at me like I had two heads. They were like, what are you talking about? Marxists? What are you, a McCarthyite? You think the college has been infiltrated by communists or something? That's what they said. And that's what I said. I said, yeah, I think so. It seems they have been. Well, it looks like they have been. It looks like those of us who were concerned about education were right. The rot is deeper than we knew. So during the 60s and 70s, KGB-funded garbage was being taught by our universities, and nobody did anything about it, even though it was known. And here we are today. Now, the same thing's been going on everywhere. That's one reason that Africa's purported to be such a wreck, is because of all of the stuff, all of the theory that was put into place in the 60s and 70s by the Soviets. So we have modern poverty and starvation in Africa to thank for their bad economic theories, the Soviet economic models. So, if that's the case, I don't know, what's the future of the battle against China? Holy moly. Now, of course, ultimately it's American freedom of speech and freedom of the press, such as it is, that allows us to get through these things. And it's you talking to me right now, and the fact that hopefully neither of us will be arrested for this conversation, that allows us to get through these things. But we're getting closer and closer to the day when people like you and I are just going to disappear from the playing board. and we're just going to disappear from the playing board. And that's how the game works everywhere else in the world besides America. So why shouldn't it happen here? And that's what a lot of people are saying. That's what a lot of people inside of our government and Antifa and on the left, that's what they're saying. Why can't we just make people disappear? They would disappear Trump if they could, wouldn't they? So check out Diane West. Check out her books and her body of thought and The Red Thread and Peter Thiel, who says that Infotech has been infiltrated by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. Check it out. Heads up, ladies and gentlemen. This message is compromised.